It's no secret that I love the concept of Cornell Notes, but in this video, I want to show you how you can customize Cornell Notes to the types of classes that you're taking and your preferred way of taking notes. Because it's not actually the famous structure of Cornell Notes that we're all familiar with that's important. It's the concept behind them, meaning why they work, which means you can actually get really creative with your Cornell Notes and make them work for you and for all your different classes in college. I'm going to show you how I would use Cornell Notes for the different types of college classes that you might have. But before I do, let's talk about why Cornell Notes work and why they're recommended so much to help you learn, understand, and do well on your exams. Cornell Notes forces you to create questions about the material that you're learning. And the reason why this is important is because studies have shown time and time again that the best and the most effective study strategies are study strategies that force you to recall from memory, meaning without your notes in front of you, what you're learning, to be able to explain it, to be able to use it without having to reference something else. The more you have to recall information from your brain, the better you retain it. And the more it makes sense and the better you do on your exams. Now, traditionally, when you're looking at Cornell Notes, they'll actually have you create your questions after taking your notes in class. But I find that for students who have a hard time knowing what to focus on, what's important, and what to write down, that this doesn't really work too well for them because they end up just rewriting everything from the textbook or rewriting everything from lecture, which is not what you want to do. So instead, what I teach students is a modified way of using Cornell Notes where you're actually writing the questions ahead of time and then you're using lecture or textbooks or PowerPoints or Khan Academy to actually answer the questions. The reason why I love this is because it primes your brain ahead of time. So your brain already knows what to focus on. It knows what to look for because what you're listening for in lecture and what you are noticing when you're reading or noticing when you're going through the PowerPoints are all of the information that's going to help you to answer those questions that you created ahead of time. And I have a step-by-step video that I've already filmed on how to actually create these questions. So if that's something that you struggle with or that you want some more guidance on, make sure that you watch that video. So once you have those questions written down, you're going to use your preferred place of learning the content from to actually answer those questions. So whether that's lecture, again, whether that's the PowerPoint, whether that is reading the textbook, it really doesn't matter. The strategy that I teach my students is to have one preferred place, one main place where you're going to take your notes from, and then have a secondary place that you can go to if the lecture maybe didn't make sense or you got distracted and missed something. You always have this supplemental resource that you can go to. So if you are primarily taking your notes from lecture, you might use the textbook as a reference. Or if you're primarily using the PowerPoint, you might use the lecture to fill in any knowledge gaps or clarify anything that you might have missed or that didn't have already enough information on the PowerPoint. I'm going into detail on this because this is how you write notes. This is the way that you write notes in a way that it serves as a study guide. It serves as a tool that you can use to self-check on whether or not you know, understand, and can apply the concepts that you're learning in class and that your professor is going to ask for you to later demonstrate that you actually understood it. The best notes are notes that serve as a study guide, as a study tool for you to see what do I know, what don't I know yet, and where do I need to focus my attention and get some support prior to going into the exam. Okay, so let's get into how I would customize Cornell Notes per the types of classes that I'm taking. So we're going to start off with what I call technical classes or technical textbooks. So these are any classes or textbooks where you are going to be solving problems. So we're talking chemistry, calculus, OChem, physics, accounting, engineering, etc. You get the point. These books are usually hard to read because they come at the subject from like a really high level sometimes, and the reason why they're assigned is because of the problems that are in them. And because these technical classes are process-based, what I would do is I would use the traditional Cornell note-taking structure with these modifications. On the left-hand side, I would use my 4-question format for technical classes, and those questions are, what is the principle that we're learning? So, for example, Newton's first law of physics. What are some example problems using this principle? And those are the problems that you would normally see on the board or in the textbook. How do I solve these problems? And what do I always need to keep in mind or make sure that I have in order to be able to answer these questions? So this is stuff like equations, or for example, in chemistry, if you're solving a problem that requires you to have a mole, but the problem doesn't give you the mole, do you know how to calculate the mole to be able to have that number to actually plug into the equation? So that's on the left-hand side. In the middle is where I would actually write out all of the examples with the step-by-step solutions and answers. And on the bottom, this is where I would keep track of any questions I have, any place I got stuck. So for example, if I'm following along with the professor, and as professors do, they're calculating in their head and putting random numbers on the board, and you're wondering, how did he get 7? Like, how did he get 7 and know to plug it in there? I would write that question down, and then that's what I would bring to tutoring. That's what I would bring to office hours, and I would say, I was following you until here. I have no idea how you got this. Can you explain to me your thought process? What were you thinking that led you to that number? So I would keep track of those questions at the bottom. Now let's move into the life sciences / humanities. So these are your biology, your psychologies, nursing, education, marketing, communications, law, sociology. You get the point? So the purpose of these classes are to teach you the main theories and principles of the subject that you're learning and how they've shaped careers and practices and the fields that they're performed in. So if I was taking one of these classes, I would use my modified method of taking Cornell Notes, where it's a question and answer format. So again, I already have a video here on YouTube on how to create those questions, but typically the places that I go to create these questions that I can then go in and write the answers to is the textbook, PowerPoint, any study guides that I'm given by my professor if they provide them. And I will literally take titles of the textbook or the objectives, and I will turn them into questions. And as I'm listening in lecture or reading the textbook, I am looking for the answer. I'm listening for the answer, and I write it down in my own words. And then later on, this can serve as a study guide for myself. So now let's go into classes that have a lot of non-fiction books. So this can be classes like literature, English, a lot of law classes might have these type of non-fiction books, and they read like chapter books, but they're usually based on facts. The author is usually trying to prove a point or sway your opinion. And these books, they follow an outline. At the beginning, you can see the framework that they're walking you through. There's an introduction, there's main points. There's a conclusion that wraps up the author's point. What I would do with these types of classes is I would use the Cornell Note method. Now remember, it's the concept of the Cornell method where we're using these questions and answers, right? That's the whole point of the Cornell note-taking method, is to pull out questions that you can then later test yourself with. I would use an outline format or a mind map where I have the main point in the middle, and then I have questions leading out, and then my summary, understanding, criticism would be underneath those questions. Now, fiction books you might find in English courses, literature, theater, humanities courses. These are your typical story chapter books or plays created from the imagination of someone brilliant. The purpose of these classes are to use stories, characters, symbols, and events that happen in the book to talk about the theme of the class, and that's usually described in the course syllabus. Now for this, I would use a sort of flow method type of Cornell Notes. I would use Morse code note-taking, in combination with Cornell Notes, or a mind map, where my focus would be on creating questions around how the characters relate to the theme, how big events in the story relate to the theme, what kind of symbolism am I noticing, and how does it weave into the direction that the professor is taking the course. So again, I'm taking the concept of Cornell Notes. When it was invented, the whole reason for it was so that students had a tool that they could then use to review and quiz themselves from. That's the reason why in the middle you have the notes, and on the side you're prompted to create questions from the information that's in the middle. Now again, I said at the beginning of this video that might work well for some students, does not work well for a lot of the students that I work with. So I recommend writing the questions first, and then that way your brain is primed to look for the answers, to look for what's important, because you've already mapped that out ahead of time and you know what you're looking for. And it can take many shapes and forms. You can use Cornell Notes with mind mapping. You can use Cornell Notes with flashcards. I did that in nursing school, where I would write the question on the front of the flashcard and on the back would be my explanation, right? There are so many different ways that you can take the concept of Cornell Notes and make it work for you. If you're an outline person, it's super easy to just start your section, your outline section, with a question and then break it down into the bullet points, right? So I'm just showing you all of the different ways that you can take the Cornell concept and get creative with it, make it fun, and make it apply to the types of classes that you're taking. Now, it's one thing to know how to take Cornell Notes for all of your different types of classes. It's another thing to actually write your notes and stay on top of it and make sure that you're not falling behind, because we know that most of us struggle with procrastination. We struggle with waiting until the last minute, which is why I want to tell you about my free guide called the Anti-Procrastination Guide for the college woman who is brilliant and tired of failing. Because when we procrastinate, it's not because we're not disciplined enough, it's not because we're not motivated enough, it's not because we're not managing our time properly, it's not because we're, in self-sabotaging patterns. There's actually something deeper going on underneath the surface. And when you can really pinpoint the reason why you're procrastinating, it becomes really easy to navigate your way through it. Because let's face it, procrastination isn't going anywhere. You're always going to have these tendencies and desires to do it. It's just the way that we humans are built. We are naturally lazy. Our brain is naturally meant to conserve energy. But inside of this guide, I give you practical tools that you can use right when you go through the guide that will immediately show you how to catch yourself when you're in procrastination and get yourself to move out of it quicker than you normally would, so that you can get more done, keep up with your quizzes, keep up with your notes, keep up with your reading, and be the type of student it is that you thought that you were going to be when you enrolled in college. And if you want to learn how to use your Cornell Notes that I taught you how to create in this video to actually study and prepare for your exams, I have a video walking you through just that on the screen right now. Click over, watch it, because it goes hand in hand with this video. So the whole reason why we're creating notes is so that we can use them as a study tool.